So today I'm going to talk about all the science fiction fantasy I've been reading recently. Included in this video is going to be a lot of new releases as well as a few backlist titles, and I'm going to probably do this rapid style because I got a lot of books to talk about here. And in this video I'm also going to discuss the huge problem I'm finding with my reading life and my booktube channel. And if you are following along, you'll be able to see what is happening or what is not happening, and I'm going to do my best to fix it because I'm aware that I need to pivot and get more science fiction in my life, so we're going to talk about it more. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk science fiction as I like to do, starting with Escape Velocity by Victor Manibo. And this is a sci-fi thriller author who I've read before. Really enjoyed their other book, The Sleepless, so I was anxious to check out this one. This one is set in the future of Earth. We follow all these individuals, these rich individuals specifically, that are living in the lower orbit of Earth on this space resort. And they are living there because Earth has become quite uninhabitable. And so as they are living there, they're also trying to get a position to go over to the Martian colony, which is considered to be the future of humanity. And so we follow these different individuals as they are trying to get there. There is more going on in the story. My favorite aspect to it was the fact that it really deals with, first off, the idea of privilege in the future, especially when it comes to space travel. It's something I've seen explored before in fiction, but I think it's a topic that is so important because I think there are some real reasons to be concerned about huge class systems coming about as we potentially move into space travel. And so I think the conversation is great. You really get to see what skills and what is valued. So for instance, one individual is a doctor, so naturally their skills are seen as more valuable over there. We also have the fact that there are couples that are infertile due to the fact that they are, say, a male-male couple, and so they are actually weighted to be less valuable on Mars because they won't naturally procreate children. And so I really love the conversations within the book of these different characters trying to vie for position, of trying to make themselves as valuable as possible, because even among the rich of the rich that exist within this resort, there is still even a class system within there, and those trying to step on each other in order to get to a better position. There is more to this book. It is an action thriller, so do expect some good narrative pace as things pick up, and definitely has an exciting ending to it. There's a lot I like about this book, but I do acknowledge that for me it didn't fully come together as a whole. I think the author was trying to do a lot of different things, and I think that the characters themselves could have been a little bit more fleshed out, or the narrative could have been a little bit more focused in order to make it a bit more impactful. This does progress into more of a sci-fi thriller, and so you have action that ensues. And for me, I would have been happy to have it be more character focused, more that conversation about the future of society. I didn't necessarily need it to go to the action plot, and that was actually the thing that made me enjoy it a little bit less. However, depending on what you're looking for, I think that there's a lot to like in this book. One of the things I'm finding this year is I'm having a lot of challenge finding new release science fiction books that I love. I always do a top 10 list at the end of the year, and if I'm honest, I'm kind of in trouble because I really needed this book to be a knockout hit, and I really need to find some new release science fiction that I love and would strongly recommend. So if you have any recommendations, please drop them down below, because at this rate, my top 10 list is going to be about a top 6 for science fiction, which maybe is fine, but I would really love to round it out to that nice 10 number that YouTube loves so much. So keep me posted with all the recommendations below because I'm in trouble as a reviewer and a reader. Now let's switch over to fantasy, starting with The Gods Below by Andrea Stewart. This is the first book in a new epic fantasy series. The basic premise is that there are divine wars between the gods that have destroyed humanity and destroyed our world. We follow individuals that are on the run. This one woman gets separated from her sister, and so there is that disconnect of trying to get back to each other. There is a lot going on in this book. There's multiple points of view. This is an author who I've read before and really enjoyed. They wrote The Bone Shard Daughter, which was a debut I adored, and so very much requested this one based off my love for that other work. This one is very different. I think that if you love one, you won't necessarily like the other one, and in fact this one I was quite disappointed with. I found that it has many points of view, but none of the points of view were ones that I found particularly compelling or interesting, and it very much was a case that I wanted to like this book a lot more than I actually did. And so this is a case that I think that there's a lot potential here. It sounds great, kind of cliche, kind of tropey, but overall, again, a story either has to be doing something compelling in terms of world building or ideas, or characters, and I felt like this one kind of missed all three for what I'm looking for in my fiction. Next up, we have The Scarlet Throne by Amy Leow, and this is a story that is inspired very loosely by Nepal culture, although the author is not of that descent or background, but instead just took inspiration there. So this follows a woman who is a living goddess of this world. However, she is getting older, and so now the people are looking for her to step down and have a younger woman take her place. Now, there's a lot of layers to this book. First, I think I want to mention that I think it's challenging to write stories that involve living gods, and especially gods walking among us, because they need to be powerful, they need to be great, they need to be gods, but then they also have to have limitations to them. And for my mind, I find it always a tricky place to walk, because you kind of have to fall into the balance of that and make it make sense from both perspectives. So you don't want someone who's overpowered, but then there's also the question of like, why don't they do more given all the power that they do have? Now, in terms of a premise, I think this one is great. It's very much a conversation that is reflective of our own even modern society, where we have older women that are asked to kind of take a step back, and a society in general here at least that really values young people, youth, and we are really always looking for that next generation, the younger beauty, etc. And I think this is especially prevalent among women, where as women age are typically seen to be kind of less valuable or less attractive, while men seem to have a longer shelf life in a lot of our modern culture. So anyway, I think in terms of premise, it was doing all the right things. I like this one, and I did like it, but I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. I think it's a challenge to write a character like this. She's naturally a bit unlikable, which actually worked well for me, but mostly I just found that this story was incredibly character focused, and the characters themselves were not as interesting, were not as complex or fleshed out as I would like them to be. They felt a bit flat and more like archetypes when I wanted them to be real people. And so I felt like the author was using these stereotypical characters to tell a particular story, while I wish that they felt like real people in and of themselves. And so I think the author just needed to go a little bit farther in terms of the character development, at least to please me. Next up, we have Long Live Evil by Rees Brennan. And this is a fun, epic fantasy story that follows a woman whose life is falling apart, and whenever that is happening, she goes to books, she goes to fantasy. And so through a series of events, she ends up falling into a fantasy world. However, when she gets there, she finds out that she is not the heroine, she is not the savior of this world, but rather she is the villain. And so a hilarious story ensues. As I'm trying to mention, the story is very light in tone. I was very much attracted to a story told from the villain's perspective, but just to be clear, while I love reading about dark and messed up villains, this character is a villain only in the very technical form. They are very likable in their way. You understand where they're coming from and that they kind of end up in this situation. There's also a lot of romance to this book, which I didn't originally realize, so keep in mind that this one does walk slightly on the line of romantasy. It definitely is playing into the popularity of that subgenre, but I think it was really fun. It's just not my type of genre to get 5 stars from me, but I definitely see people who are looking for something a little bit lighter and cuter and want to play around with the idea of reading from the villain's perspective, but they don't really want to read from a true big baddie and just want someone who kind of is just going through the motions of it. I think that this one is a lot of fun, definitely has an audience, not entirely for me, but it was still pretty fun to check out. I also want to talk about Blood of the Old Kings by Sung Il Kim, and this is a story that is translated from its original language of Korean. It's an epic fantasy story where you find out that sorcerers, when they die, their bodies are used to power the cities, and so we follow one sorcerer who wants to find a different life for themselves. At the beginning of the story, they have this voice that appears to be contacting them, and soon you find out more about what is going on behind that voice, and it spearheads into something else. Now, this is one that I was very interested in because of the fact that not only have I not read much Korean translated SFF, I'm always looking for more, but particularly what really drew me in was the premise of that dark idea of having the sorcerer's magic be drained, and the idea that is built into the story is the fact that sorcerers are particularly trained through this academy, and everything in their life is building up to them just becoming a battery when they are dead. And I love the darkness to that premise. I think it really intrigues me. I love stories that are a bit more dark in terms of setup. The only downside I have to the story is the fact that I found the narrative in terms of the writing to be quite plain. It's very much a story that is simplistic and doesn't have a lot of beautiful writing around it. Instead, it really tells the story in a very straightforward way. Now, as a translated work, I'm always struggling or wondering about whether or not the translation lost something in that switch or if it's very representative of the original writing style. But regardless, it's a story that I loved what the story was a lot more than the way that it was told. It's a case where I found everything was presented in a really linear fashion, a really simple way, and I wanted the author to add more complexity to the story. So it's a case where it was still a good story, but I feel like it could have been an amazing story. This story could have been a 5 stars for me had the writing really been up to the level of the potential of all of this. So it's one I still would recommend. Just be aware that if you're someone who picks up fancy stories and cares a lot about the prose, cares a lot about what the narrative style is like, if that's really important to you to have a particular flair and you get a lot of enjoyment from the writing style itself, this one is pretty sparse. But if you're more just someone who is reading for a really good story, one that is darker in nature, there's definitely still reason to check this one out. I would absolutely check out more by this author if it gets translated. Next is The Wind That Sweeps the Stars by Greg Keyes. This is a standalone fantasy book that is by the same author who wrote The Basilisk's Throne, a book that I really enjoyed. I believe it came out last year, and so I was eager to read more by them. And this one follows a woman who was, at the beginning of the story, betrothed to a man in order to stop a war. However, the war came anyway, making this marriage of politics essentially useless. And so the story progresses, right, and this is just a setup, that this individual is actually an assassin and uses their training to take down those from the inside. And this is one that hits on all the fantasy tropes. It just feels like it's ticking off boxes. However, I would argue that it does it very well. I personally enjoy this author's writing. I find it very easy and pleasing. It's nothing particularly fancy or purpley by any means, but it just feels very solid as an author who has written many books before this one. He clearly has a proficiency with the word. And so in this one, it is in a lot of ways predictable. You will see events that you are going to see in many fantasy books as you read through the genre, but I would say that they do them well. The characters, while not the most complex, not the most out of the box, feel well-rounded enough considering how short this book is. I flew through it and was overly satisfied. It was kind of what I was looking for. It, again, isn't a 5-star read. It isn't something that blew me away and changed my perspective on fantasy and made me think about the world differently. But was it a enjoyable read that delivered what I was expecting from it? Absolutely. This is one of my strongest fantasy recommendations based off my personal taste in this video. So I do recommend checking this out if you're looking for something a little bit more underhyped. Perhaps you don't want to commit to a full long series and just want to get in and out of a really good fantasy book. This is one you might want to try. Next is Dungeon Crawler Carl, and this is a lit RPG cross between fantasy with a little bit of science fiction mixed in. It follows a man who right at the beginning of the story has broken up with his girlfriend and ended up with her cat, and then through circumstances he ends up in this game show which essentially is meant to mirror a dungeon that you would go through in a popular MMO type video game. And so he has to go through the various levels, destroy the bad guys, and so forth. As I mentioned, this one does have a sci-fi element to it. I kind of enjoyed going in blind and finding out how that worked into the plot. But in terms of narrative, I'm putting it in my fantasy section just because it's largely going to appeal to those of you, again, that love lit RPGs, stories where you level up and kind of mirror a video game sense. And this was really fun. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I often say that for a book to be a 5-star read for me, it typically has to lean into the side of more serious, and that still is true here. I enjoyed this one, but I didn't love it enough for it to be an all-time favorite the same way it is for other people, but I understand why it becomes a favorite for so many. If you're looking for a humorous story, one with a really strong narrative voice, because you really get to hear inside this man's head and really understand what he's going through, and a lot of the jokingness that comes with that. And so I very much understand why the audiobook narration is so popular. I did actually get a chance to listen to some of it because my friend had gifted me an audiobook copy of this, which was perfect. So I did a bit of both, and I can definitely see the advantages to the audiobook just bringing that humor to life, that voice to life, and really having you follow along. So if you love the humor of things like Project Hail Mary, John Scalzi's books, all of that, there is a great crossover here. I think, again, if you just love stories that kind of make fun of themselves, make fun of the RPG genres, video games in general, and enjoy stories like this, there is so much to enjoy. This is the first in the series, and I definitely want to check out more if I can. And finally, I want to talk about The Dream Dream Blood duology, which starts with A Killing Moon by N.K. Jemisin. This is a series that is set in a secondary world, and it is a place where we have priests that are using the power of other people's dreams and turning it into the magic of this world. This is a very brief synopsis there. It is one that I've been wanting to check out because I've really enjoyed some of the author's other more recent work and wanted to go back through their backlist. A lot of people have said that this is not their strongest, and I would agree with that. In terms of the plot, despite how cool it sounds to use dreams and turn it into magic, it doesn't really have the same power as some of their newer work like the Broken Earth trilogy. However, what I love about this author is their writing style, which is a particular style and is not to everyone's taste, but I've come to really love it myself. I got to see the early threads of that in this work, and as well, I think I really enjoy how the author does the world building in general, where it is not spoon-fed to the reader or just info dumped. Instead, you really have to piece together what is happening, which makes for a more complex and, for me, in a more engaging reading experience when I have to puzzle out things along the way. So I very much enjoy this. It's not where I would start with this author's work, but if you're like me and have really enjoyed other things you've read by them, I do think it's worth reading through their full collection, and I think this one, again, will deliver what you're looking for. Just know that it's not the best that they have to offer. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And please give me recommendations for new release sci-fi books that you don't think I've read yet, because I really need to balance out my reading. If you paid attention to this wrap-up video, I'm very aware of the fact that it was 90-ish% fantasy, and as someone who likes to identify myself as a sci-fi reader and booktuber, I really need to change that. I want to be reading more science fiction, whether it be new releases or backlists, but if I'm honest, it's way easier to get my hands on fantasy these days, and those are the books that I always hear recommended. They're the books that are being offered to me by publicists when I go to review or request books that are science fiction from publicists. A lot of times they say no, which is disappointing. They're a lot harder to get my hands on, but I want to change that. I want to put in the effort and make it happen. All that being said, if you want to stick around and subscribe, I appreciate that. If you want to give me a big thumbs up, you can drop a comment, even if just a little emoji like a spaceship or a dragon. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.